Despite its staggering impact, the 1918 influenza pandemic faded somewhat from public memory in the decades that followed. The devastation of World War I, followed by political upheavals and the onset of the Great Depression, overshadowed the collective trauma of the pandemic. Only in recent decades has the event received renewed scholarly attention, especially as modern outbreaks such as the 2009 H1N1 pandemic and the COVID-19 crisis prompted comparisons to 1918. Scientific research into preserved tissue samples has revealed that the 1918 virus was an H1N1 influenza A strain with avian origins. Advances in virology have allowed researchers to reconstruct the virus in laboratory settings to better understand its virulence and transmission. These studies have informed modern pandemic preparedness strategies, emphasizing early intervention, transparent communication, and global cooperation. The 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic remains a stark reminder of how vulnerable societies can be to emerging infectious diseases. It demonstrated how war, globalization, and limited medical knowledge can amplify the spread of illness. More than a century later, its lessons continue to shape public health policy and global responses to pandemics, underscoring the importance of vigilance, science, and international collaboration in the face of invisible threats. Unlike typical influenza outbreaks, which tend to disproportionately affect the very young and the elderly, the 1918 pandemic had an unusually high mortality rate among healthy young adults aged 20 to 40. Scientists believe this may have been due to a cytokine storm, an overreaction of the immune system that caused severe inflammation and organ failure. The loss of so many young adults had profound social and economic consequences, particularly in countries already devastated by war. The third wave emerged in early 1919 and, while serious, was less deadly than the second. By the summer of 1919, the pandemic had largely subsided, though localized outbreaks continued for several years. In total, an estimated 500 million people were infected at a time when the global population was about 1.8 billion. Public health responses varied widely and were often inconsistent. With no vaccines, antiviral drugs, or antibiotics, which would not become widely available until years later, communities relied on non-pharmaceutical interventions. Cities closed schools, theaters, and churches, banned public gatherings, and encouraged mask wearing. Some places that implemented these measures early saw lower death rates. For example, the city of St. Louis responded more quickly than Philadelphia, which proceeded with a large public parade in September 1918 that contributed to a dramatic spike in cases. The pandemic also had far-reaching global effects. In India, then under British colonial rule, millions perished, exacerbating existing social and political tensions. In remote Pacific islands and parts of Africa, entire communities were decimated. The scale of death disrupted economies, strained healthcare systems, and deepened the trauma already inflicted by World War I. In some regions, life expectancy dropped sharply within a single year. The 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic was one of the deadliest global health disasters in human history. Striking during the final year of World War I, the outbreak infected an estimated one-third of the world's population and killed at least 50 million people worldwide, with some estimates reaching even higher. Though commonly called the Spanish flu, the virus did not originate in Spain. The name emerged because wartime censorship in combatant countries limited news reporting, while neutral Spain openly reported on the outbreak, especially after King Alfonso XIII fell ill, leading many to mistakenly associate the disease with Spain. The exact origin of the 1918 influenza strain remains debated. Some historians and scientists point to military camps in the United States, particularly Camp Funston in Kansas, where one of the earliest documented outbreaks occurred in March 1918. Others suggest origins in Europe or even Asia. Regardless of where it began, the global troop movements and crowded military conditions of World War I created ideal circumstances for the virus to spread rapidly across continents. The pandemic unfolded in three distinct waves. The first wave, in the spring of 1918, was relatively mild. Many infected individuals experienced typical flu symptoms, fever, fatigue, and aches, and most recovered. However, the second wave, which began in late summer and intensified through the fall of 1918, proved devastating. This mutation of the virus was far more lethal. Patients often developed severe viral pneumonia, and some died within days. In many cases, victims turned blue from lack of oxygen, a condition known as cyanosis, as their lungs filled with fluid. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and in some cities, temporary morgues were established to handle the surge in fatalities.